The rain began just before dawn, tapping faintly against the rusted zinc roof of the cramped Lagos apartment. Inside, the air was heavy with grief, thick enough to choke on. Mama Ebier knelt on the cracked linoleum floor, her hands trembling as she clutched the lifeless body of her husband, Akimi. His face, once full of laughter and mischief, was still. Her sobs came in silent waves. She had no strength left to cry out. Around her, their 5 children huddled together like frightened chicks. Ebier, Toi, Abama, Sholu, and little Fadia, each too young to understand death, yet already tasting its bitterness. The door creaked open. "Move away!" A sharp female voice pierced the silence. It was Furo, Akimi's elder sister, flanked by 3 relatives with faces hard as granite. Without a word of comfort, they stormed into the room and began gathering valuables: television, chairs, Akimi's radio, even the mattress. "What are you doing?" Mama Ebier's voice cracked as she rose shakily to her knees. "You killed our brother," Furo spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "You want to sit on his wealth too? Never. Furo, please. Akimi loved us all. Don't do this in front of the children," she begged, tears streaking her dusty cheeks. But her pleas were swallowed by the chaos. They stripped the house bare, their movements swift and merciless, leaving nothing behind but the cold body and the hollow echo of loss. By nightfall, Mama Ebier sat on the bare floor, cradling Fadia, the youngest, against her chest. She had nothing left, no money, no food, no bed to sleep on. The hum of the city outside felt cruel, mocking her misery with its indifference. On the 4th day, she gathered what little she had into an old raffia bag and wiped her tears. "We are going home," she whispered to her children. The road to Agbari was long and uncertain, but Lagos had become a graveyard of memories. She could not stay, not when every corner whispered Akimi's name, not when her children's bellies growled louder than the city noise. By midday, they found themselves at Jibua Motor Park, standing amid the chaos of honking buses, shouting conductors, and vendors selling groundnuts under umbrellas. The stench of diesel and sweat clung to the humid air. "Mama," Toi tugged her wrapper, his voice small. "Will there be food in Agbari?" "Yes, my son," she said, forcing a smile though her throat ached. "We will be fine. Your Uncle Afaf is there." But inside, she wasn't sure. She hadn't seen Elder Afaf in over a decade. Would he even take them in? A battered green bus bound for Baelsa screeched to a halt, and she ushered her children aboard. The seats were torn, the windows rattled, and passengers shouted over each other to secure space. It was the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The bus roared out of Lagos and into the winding highways that led eastward. Palm trees blurred past the dusty windows, their shadows stretching over the tarmac like reaching hands. The driver blared loud Fuji music, but for Mama Ebier, the world was muted. She gazed out the window, holding Fadia close while Toi rested his head on her shoulder. "Ebier," she whispered to her eldest daughter, "hold Abama's hand tightly. Do not let him wander." "Yes, Mama," the 12-year-old replied softly. Hours passed. The bus lurched and groaned over potholes, each jolt rattling her tired bones. Sweat clung to her skin, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. As dusk fell, the forest deepened around them, tall trees casting long shadows across the narrow roads. At one point, the bus slowed near a broken-down truck, and whispers of armed robbers rippled through the passengers. Mama Ebier held her children tighter, whispering silent prayers until the danger passed. Finally, after 13 grueling hours, the bus rumbled into Agbari, halting at a dusty roadside where villagers carried firewood and farm produce on their heads. Smoke curled from distant cooking fires, and the sound of crickets filled the humid night. At the entrance of the village stood a tall, aged man with a soldier's bearing, leaning on a polished walking stick. Elder Afaf. His once broad shoulders were now slightly stooped, his gray beard neatly trimmed, and his khaki shirt faded from years of washing. "Apumo," he called softly, using her maiden name. "Uncle." Her voice broke as she knelt before him, clutching his legs. "I have nowhere else to go." He placed a trembling hand on her shoulder and pulled her up. "You are home now," he said firmly, though his voice carried the weight of old pain. Elder Afaf led them into his modest compound, a mud-brick house shaded by mango trees. Inside, he offered them a bamboo bench to sit on, then disappeared briefly, returning with a calabash of water. The children drank eagerly, their small hands trembling from exhaustion. "You will stay here for now," he said, lowering himself onto a stool. "I will do what I can, but my pension is small." We must find a way for you to stand on your feet again." That night, lying on a raffia mat, Mama Ebiere stared into the shadows on the ceiling, her mind racing. How would she feed 5 children in a village where everyone struggled? The next morning, as the sun cast a golden glow over Agbari, a man approached the compound carrying a sack of yam on his shoulder. It was Mr. Affair, a well-known farmer and trader in the village. He greeted Elder Affaif warmly before turning his attention to Mama Ebiere. "I remember you," he said, smiling faintly. "Akimi's wife. Years ago, at the community festival, I tasted your food. You cook better than anyone here." She managed a polite nod. "Those days are long gone." Affair shook his head. "Hunger never dies, Mama Ebiere. People will always eat. You should start a small food business. There's a busy road by the cemetery where traders pass daily. It could be a good spot." Her brows furrowed. "By the cemetery?" "Yes," Affair said, lowering his voice. "People fear it, but fear doesn't stop hunger. You'd have little competition there." That night, she pondered his words. The thought of selling food near graves unsettled her, yet the idea clung to her mind like stubborn smoke. 3 weeks later, after borrowing a small sum from Elder Affaif and pawning her wedding necklace, the morning sun crept slowly over Agbari, stretching its golden fingers across the red earth paths. Birds chirped lazily, palm trees swayed in the warm breeze, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster crowed. But inside Elder Affaif's compound, there was no peace, only the low hum of worry. Mama Ebiere sat on a bamboo bench with her head bowed, watching her 5 children chase each other barefoot on the dusty ground. Her mind was elsewhere, on hunger, survival, and the future that felt as fragile as a clay pot in the hands of a restless child. For weeks, she had searched the village for a good location to start her food business. Every path she walked, every corner she turned, she asked the same question. Where will the people come? She needed a place where hungry farmers, traders, and travelers would stop, eat, and pay. But every potential shop she found had the same problem. Either the rent was too high or the location was hidden, away from the flow of people. Her small savings, scraped together from selling her wedding necklace and borrowing from Elder Affaif, were almost gone. One afternoon, as she wandered through the market, carrying Fadia on her hip, she overheard 2 women gossiping near a pepper stall. "The road by the old cemetery is always busy," one said, adjusting her scarf. "Traders pass there all day." "Ah, but who wants to eat near graves?" the other replied, shuddering. "No good spirit stays there." The words lodged themselves in Mama Ebiere's heart. That evening, after putting the children to sleep, she walked to the old cemetery road. The place was eerie. Tall grass swayed in the evening breeze, and the wooden crosses marking forgotten graves leaned at odd angles like broken teeth. A narrow dirt road ran past it, busy even at dusk. Farmers trudged by carrying cassava, traders pushed wheelbarrows full of yams, and schoolchildren passed in noisy clusters. She stood there for a long time, arms folded tightly, wrestling with herself. "Near a cemetery?" she whispered. "Will people eat my food? Or will fear chase them away?" But another thought crept in. Hunger is stronger than fear. That night, she dreamed of Akimi, her late husband, standing barefoot on the same road, smiling faintly. "Apumo," he said softly, "don't be afraid of shadows." She woke up with sweat on her brow, and her mind made up. 3 days later, Mama Ebiere rented a small wooden shop on the cemetery road. The structure leaned slightly to one side, its zinc roof rusted, but it was all she could afford. She scrubbed the floor clean, patched the gaps in the walls with palm fronds, and borrowed an old charcoal stove from Elder Affaif. The morning she opened her restaurant, the air smelled of palm oil, garlic, and fresh pepper. Steam rose from bubbling pots of jollof rice, goat meat pepper soup, fried plantain, and bunga soup simmering gently over the fire. She waited. Hour after hour, she stood at the entrance, smiling at passers-by, inviting them warmly. "Good afternoon, my brother, come chop food." "Madam, hot pepper soup day, I beg try small." But no one stopped. People walked by, casting quick glances at the cemetery and muttering under their breath. By sunset, not a single plate had been sold. For 3 straight weeks, business was dead. She cooked every morning, hoping each day would be different. But by nightfall she returned home with unsold food, her children eating what should have earned her income. Ebiere, her eldest daughter, began skipping meals so her younger siblings could eat. Toi grew thinner, his clothes hanging loosely on his small frame. One evening, she sat outside the shop, staring at the setting sun as tears rolled down her cheeks. Her hands trembled from exhaustion, her lips cracked from hunger. She thought of giving up, of closing the shop and going back to Lagos, even if it meant begging on the streets. "God," she whispered, her voice breaking, "have you forgotten me?" That night, something strange happened. In her dream, she found herself standing inside her shop, but everything looked different. The walls were new, the pots were shining, and the air smelled of freshly cooked food. An elderly woman dressed in white appeared from the shadows, her skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her eyes were sharp, piercing, and yet strangely kind. "Mama Ebier," the woman said softly, her voice like rustling leaves. "Why do you weep?" "No one buys my food," she replied, her voice trembling. "I cannot feed my children." The woman smiled faintly. "Serve me everything on your menu." Mama Ebier hesitated. "But there are no customers." "Serve me," the woman insisted. Without question, she dished out jollof rice, pepper soup, plantain, and soup into a single large tray. The woman sat, ate silently, and when she was done, she looked up with a strange calmness. "From tomorrow," the woman said, "they will come." Mama Ebier blinked, and suddenly the woman was gone. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. For a moment, she thought it was just a dream, until she smelled pepper soup lingering faintly in the air, though she had cooked nothing that night. The next morning, she walked to her shop, still shaken by the dream. She set up as usual, preparing her food, expecting another quiet, hopeless day. But just after noon, something strange happened. A group of men approached, laughing loudly, carrying tools from the nearby farm. "Madam, what'n you get?" one asked, wiping sweat from his brow. She stared for a moment, frozen, before stammering. "Jollof rice, pepper soup, plantain." "Give us 4 plates," the man interrupted. Within minutes, more people came, farmers, traders, hunters, even students from the nearby school. Some helped her wash plates, others fanned the fire, and still more shouted orders for food. By evening, every single pot was empty. Mama Ebier stood behind the counter, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you, God, thank you." But as she counted her earnings that night, something strange caught her attention. Through the open door, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the cemetery, a woman in white, glowing faintly under the moonlight. The same woman from her dream. She smiled at Mama Ebier, and then vanished into the graves. Mama Ebier's breath caught in her throat. She told no one. Not yet. By the 3rd week after the mysterious dream, Mama Ebier's small food stall by the cemetery transformed into the busiest eatery in Agbari. From sunrise till dusk, the once lonely dirt road now pulsed with life. Farmers returning from their cassava fields stopped to eat. Traders from nearby villages made detours just to taste her goat meat pepper soup. Even school teachers and hunters came by, filling every bench she owned. Some days, the queue was so long that people sat on the low walls of the cemetery, laughing, talking, and eating without a care. It was as though the fear of the dead had vanished overnight. "Mama Ebier," one regular customer said, licking his fingers, "whatever magic you put in your stew, keep doing it. Oh, this is the best food in all of Bayelsa." She smiled faintly, hiding her trembling hands in her wrapper. She knew better. But prosperity always attracts questions. And gossip. By the end of the 2nd month, the villagers had started whispering. "Did you hear?" One woman whispered at the market. "That widow Mama Ebier, her food day sweet because she day cook em with juju." Another woman shook her head vigorously. "No, I hear say she day use water from the cemetery well. Now why everybody day craze for her food." A young man nearby laughed. "Me I no care. If not juju day inside, a beg make she add more." Mama Ebier ignored the gossip as best she could, but sometimes late at night, the whispers crawled back into her mind, gnawing at her thoughts. Despite the murmurs, wealth began to flow into her life like water breaking through a dam. She bought a grinding machine for the kitchen, hired 2 young girls from the village to help with cooking, and even repainted the shop in bright colors. She purchased a small generator, and for the first time in years, her children slept without sweating through the night. Ebier, her eldest, enrolled in a private secondary school. Toi, always the curious one, joined a science club in town. Abama and Sholu, her middle children, no longer worried about skipping meals, while little Fadia finally stopped crying from hunger. It was as though God himself had remembered her. Or so she thought. The night before the village festival, Mama Ebier had another dream. She found herself back in her shop, but this time, the air was heavy and cold. The pots were empty,
and the once busy restaurant was silent. From the shadows, the elderly woman in white appeared again. Her face was calm, her steps slow and deliberate. But this time, there was no warmth in her eyes. "You're doing well," the woman said softly, her voice echoing like distant thunder. "Yes, Mama," Ebier replied cautiously. "The customers come every day now. I thank God." The woman tilted her head slightly. "God?" She chuckled darkly. "Do you think these customers are yours?" Mama Ebier frowned. "What do you mean?" "They are mine," the woman said, her voice sharp as glass. "I sent them to you, from the land of the dead." Ebier's stomach turned to ice. The woman stepped closer, her white garments billowing though there was no wind. "And now it is time to pay." "Pay? You will offer me something precious," the woman said, her tone final. "Your first daughter." "Ebier." Mama Ebier gasped, falling to her knees. "No, I never made any covenant with you. I will not give you my child." The woman's expression hardened. "Refuse me, and everything you have gained will vanish. Your children will suffer. You will return to hunger, but this time, it will be worse." Before Mama Ebier could respond, the ground beneath her feet opened, and she fell into a dark, endless pit. She woke up screaming. The next morning, she told no one about the dream. But strange things began to happen. That same afternoon, her eldest daughter, Ebier, suddenly collapsed while fetching water. When they rushed her to the village clinic, the doctor shook his head, confused. "She's perfectly healthy," he said. "No sickness, no fever. I cannot explain this fainting." 2 days later, it happened again. And again. Her shop helpers reported hearing soft voices whispering from the cemetery at night, calling her name. Pots began to rattle without reason. Some mornings, she arrived to find footprints, wet, muddy, and too large to be human, leading from the graves to her door. Still, the customers kept coming. In fact, business became busier than ever. And that terrified her more than the strange happenings. One stormy night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Mama Ebier locked up the shop late and began walking home. The cemetery road was dark and silent, except for the chirping of crickets. But halfway down the path, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. The elderly woman in white stood just meters away, glowing faintly beneath the lightning. "You cannot run from me, Apumo," she said softly. "The feast is near. Choose your child, or I will choose for you." Mama Ebier dropped her basket and ran, heart pounding, until she burst into Elder Afaf's compound, panting and shaking like a trapped bird. That night, she wept silently on the bamboo bench, holding her children close as the rain lashed against the roof. By the next morning, she knew she couldn't keep silent anymore. She went to Elder Afaf and told him everything. The dreams, the woman, the demands, the fainting spells, the strange happenings at the shop. The old soldier listened quietly, his brows furrowed, his knuckles white around his walking stick. When she finished, he spoke in a low, firm voice. "This is no ordinary business, Apumo. You have unknowingly opened a door. You must seek help before it is too late." He took her by the hand and led her to Pastor Miracle, the fiery preacher of the village. The pastor prayed over her, laying his hands on her trembling shoulders, and his voice thundered through the small church. "Spirit of darkness, leave this woman and her household." But even as he prayed, the oil lamp flickered violently, and a chilling wind swept through the room. Pastor Miracle opened his eyes slowly and whispered, almost to himself, "The covenant is deeper than I thought." That night, Mama Ebier sat awake, watching her children sleep. She looked at Ebier, her first daughter, lying peacefully beside Fadia, and tears burned her eyes. She remembered Lagos. She remembered hunger. She remembered the nights her children cried themselves to sleep. And she realized with a sharp, painful certainty that whatever force had made her rich was not done with her yet. For the first time since she opened the restaurant, she wished the customers would stop coming. But they didn't. They came in greater numbers than ever. And Mama Ebier knew the bill was almost due. Mama Ebier's restaurant had become the beating heart of Agbari. Every day, the little stall by the cemetery throbbed with life. Sizzling oil, clanging plates, laughter, and endless queues of hungry villagers and travelers. Business was booming, and so was her reputation. But in the middle of this success, darkness crept silently into her home. It started one humid evening. Her eldest daughter, Ebier, collapsed without warning while sweeping the compound. At first, they thought it was exhaustion from schoolwork and the long walk back from her new boarding school. But when she woke, pale and trembling, something in her glassy stare unsettled Mama Ebier's heart. "Are you okay, my child?" she asked, kneeling beside her. I don't know, Mama, Ebier whispered, clutching her chest. I felt cold, then everything went dark. Mama Ebier brushed it off at first, thinking it was fatigue. But the next day it happened again. And then again. By the third fainting spell, panic seized Mama Ebier. She bundled her daughter into a taxi and rushed to the community hospital in town. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old paper files. The ceiling fan creaked lazily as they waited, her heart pounding louder than the generator outside. Finally, the doctor emerged, wiping sweat from his forehead. Madam, he said carefully, we've run every test we can. Her blood pressure is normal, sugar levels are fine, no fever, no infections. There's nothing wrong with her. Mama Ebier's face twisted in confusion. But she keeps collapsing. The doctor shook his head, frustration etched across his features. Medically, this child is perfectly healthy. Whatever this is, it is beyond science. Those words clung to her like a curse. That night, she sat by Ebier's bedside, watching her daughter breathe. The kerosene lamp burned low, shadows dancing on the mud walls. The other children slept soundly, but Mama Ebier's mind raced. She thought of the strange dream, the mysterious woman in white, and the chilling demand for her first daughter. No, she whispered fiercely to herself. I will never give her up. Never. But the more she refused, the worse things became. Every night, Ebier woke screaming, her body drenched in sweat. Sometimes, she spoke in her sleep, mumbling strange words in a language no one understood. Other nights, she clawed at her bedsheets as though fighting invisible hands. The neighbors began whispering. They say spirits are troubling her, one muttered at the well. They say Mama Ebier offended the cemetery gods, another replied grimly. By the fourth week, Mama Ebier herself had stopped sleeping. One night, when the moon hung low and pale above Agbari, Mama Ebier drifted into a restless sleep. She found herself standing inside her restaurant. The tables were full, the pots boiling over with food. But when she looked closely at her customers, her blood froze. Their faces were pale. Their eyes were empty. Their lips moved without sound as they chewed and chewed and chewed. From the corner of the room, the woman in white appeared again, gliding noiselessly across the floor. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with unnatural light. You refuse me, she said softly, but her voice carried the weight of thunder. Mama Ebier fell to her knees, trembling. Please leave my daughter alone. I did not call you. I made no covenant with you. The woman tilted her head slightly. No covenant? And yet you fed me in your dream. You opened the door when I knocked. You accepted the blessing of my children. Now you must repay. No. You tricked me. Tricked. The woman's voice sharpened like shattered glass. Nothing comes without a price, Apumo. If you will not give your daughter, I will take her myself. The dream ended with a deafening scream. The sound of her daughter's voice calling out from somewhere deep and dark. She woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a drum. By dawn, desperation drove her to Elder Afaf's compound, tears streaming down her face. Uncle, she sobbed, kneeling before him. If you don't help me, I will lose my child. Elder Afaf, his face lined with both age and worry, placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. It is time we seek God's intervention, he said firmly. This battle is not of flesh and blood. Together, they went to see Pastor Miracle, the fiery preacher known across 3 villages for his spiritual deliverance sessions. His church was a small wooden structure on a hill, its cross silhouetted against the morning sun. Pastor Miracle listened intently as Mama Ebier told her story. The dreams, the woman in white, the sudden boom in business, and the attacks on her daughter. When she finished, the pastor stood slowly, his face grave. Sister Apumo, he said, you have unknowingly entered a spiritual covenant. The food you served in that dream was an offering. You opened a door, and now something walks through it. Her voice shook. What must I do, Pastor? You must break the covenant, he said. But be warned, they will not let go without a fight. That evening, Pastor Miracle came to Mama Ebier's shop with 3 prayer warriors. They lit candles, anointed the walls with oil, and began to pray, their voices rising like thunder. Every spirit of darkness, release this family. Outside, the wind picked up violently. The trees groaned. The zinc roof rattled like it would tear off. Suddenly, one of the prayer warriors screamed as a pot of soup flew off the counter, crashing to the floor without anyone touching it. Then came the sound, the eerie, wailing cry of women, but no one was there. Do not stop, Pastor Miracle commanded, his voice fierce. They are angry. For hours, the battle raged. The candles flickered violently, shadows leapt across the walls, and the air grew thick and cold. Then, suddenly, Ebier, who had been lying on a mat nearby, sat bolt upright. Her eyes were white, her voice strange. "Leave us alone," she hissed, though it was not her voice speaking. "She belongs to us." Pastor Miracle struck the ground with his staff and shouted, "She belongs to the living, not the dead. By the blood of Jesus, release her." Ebier screamed, a sound that shook the walls, and then collapsed. Silent. When Ebier woke the next morning, she looked around the room slowly, confusion in her tired eyes. "Mama," she whispered, her voice weak. "I had a dream. A woman was calling me into the cemetery." Mama Ebier gathered her daughter into her arms, tears streaming freely. Pastor Miracle warned her gently, "This is not over. Leave that shop, leave that place, leave even the spoons behind. You must cut every tie." And for the first time in months, Mama Ebier realized that her booming business, her miracle, had come with a cost she could never afford to pay. The night was heavy with silence when Mama Ebier returned to Pastor Miracle's church. The wooden structure sat on a small hill, its single cross silhouetted against the fading moonlight. Inside, only a few candles burned, casting long shadows on the mud walls. She came carrying little Ebier in her arms, pale and weak after yet another fainting spell. Elder Afaf walked beside her, his walking stick tapping against the ground with each step, his face grim and determined. Pastor Miracle stood at the altar, head bowed, sweat gleaming on his brow despite the cool air. 3 prayer warriors knelt behind him, softly chanting in low, steady voices. When Mama Ebier reached the altar, the pastor raised his hand. "Tonight," he said, his deep voice echoing, "we fight the final battle." He anointed her forehead with oil, then placed a hand on her trembling shoulders. As he began to pray, the candles flickered violently, as if an unseen wind had entered the church. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate, and outside, dogs began to howl in the distance. "Spirit of death," Pastor Miracle thundered, "release this family. Leave this child and return to the place where you belong." Suddenly, little Ebier's body convulsed violently, her small hands clawing at the air. A cold wind swept through the church, snuffing out 2 candles. Then came the voice. It was not the girl's voice. It was deeper, older, and laced with fury. "She belongs to us," it hissed. The prayer warriors pressed on, their chants growing louder, filling the room like waves crashing against rocks. Pastor Miracle slammed his staff onto the altar and roared, "She belongs to the living, not the dead. By the authority of heaven, I command you to go." There was a deafening scream, the sound of many voices wailing in unison. The candles flared back to life, and suddenly silence. Little Ebier collapsed, limp but breathing steadily. Pastor Miracle knelt beside her, his face pale but resolute. "The battle is not over," he said softly. "This ground is cursed. You must leave everything behind, Apumo. Everything. Even the spoons in that shop." The next morning, Mama Ebier returned to her restaurant. The pots were neatly stacked, the benches still warm from the customers of the previous day. The air smelled of dried pepper and firewood. But for the first time since she opened the shop, the place felt cold. She ran her fingers over the wooden counter where she had counted her first earnings, where her laughter had once rung out freely, where she had believed, foolishly, that her miracle had no price. Her children stood quietly by the door, watching her. None of them spoke. Even little Fadia seemed to understand the weight of what was happening. Finally, she whispered to herself, "We leave it all." She didn't lock the door. She didn't take a single pot, not even the wooden spoon she'd carved with her late husband's initials. As she walked away, she felt the weight of her booming success slip from her shoulders. But the loss cut deep. With Elder Afaf's help, they packed what little they could carry and boarded a rickety bus headed for Aburi, a quiet town near the banks of the river Niger. The journey was long and silent. The children huddled together, clutching their mother's hands tightly, their faces pale but hopeful. Outside, the landscape shifted from red earth villages to lush green wetlands, the smell of the river growing stronger as they drew closer to their new home. Aburi was different. The town was quieter, the people warmer, and the streets alive with the sound of water sellers, fishermen, and traders. Through the help of a local church, Pastor Miracle secured a small one-room apartment for the family. It was cramped, but it was safe, or so she thought. At first, life in Aburi seemed peaceful. Mama Ebier began selling smoked fish by the riverside, a modest business that barely brought enough income, but kept food on the table. Her children started school again, slowly settling into the rhythm of a calmer life. She attended church every Sunday, prayed at dawn and dusk, and avoided anything that reminded her of the shop, the cemetery, or the mysterious woman in white. For a while, it seemed the nightmare had ended, until the dreams returned. One humid night, months after settling in a buri, Mama Ebier dreamt she was standing on the riverbank. Mist rolled over the surface of the water, and a soft, eerie hum filled the air. From the fog, the woman in white emerged again, her face serene, her eyes glowing faintly. "You think you are free?" the woman whispered, her voice as smooth as rippling water. Mama Ebier stepped back, heart pounding. "Leave us alone. We left everything. I have nothing of yours anymore." The woman tilted her head and smiled faintly. "You can leave the shop, but you cannot leave the debt. The door you opened still stands open." Then slowly the mist began to shift. Shapes emerged behind the woman. Figures pale and silent, their faces blank, their hollow eyes fixed on Mama Ebier. "They are hungry," the woman said softly. "And you are still feeding them." Mama Ebier woke with a scream, drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. The next morning, as she walked to the riverside market, she overheard two fishermen talking. "Have you tried that new food stall?" one said. "The woman cooks near the old shrine by the riverbank. People say her food's sweet past any other." The other fisherman nodded, lowering his voice. "Strange thing, though, they say her customers come mostly at night. And when she closes, footprints lead straight into the water." Mama Ebier froze. The shrine, the riverbank, the footprints. Her hands trembled as she realized something terrible. She had unknowingly rented a shop not far from an abandoned shrine, one that locals claimed was older than the town itself. And as the wind rustled through the palm trees, carrying the distant cries of river birds, she felt it deep in her bones. She had not escaped. She had only moved closer. That night, as the children slept, Mama Ebier stepped outside and sat beneath the moonlight, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The air was heavy with the scent of the river, cool and damp. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound, the soft shuffle of feet behind her. She turned slowly, her heart thudding like a drum. There, at the edge of the compound, half hidden in the shadows, stood a pale figure in white. The woman. Again. She raised one slender finger to her lips and whispered, barely audible but clear enough to freeze Mama Ebier's blood. "It's not over." And then she vanished into the night,